Hello and welcome to the 2017 first edition of Capitol Dateline. We're here once again in the Capitol Dateline studios at the Florida Cable Telecommunications Association. I'm joined by Jim Saunders, Executive Editor of the News Service of Florida. Jim, welcome to a brand new year.
All right, we're ready to roll.
So last week was surely a hefty news week with everybody closed in the Capitol. So instead of talking about what happened last week, we're going to talk about what's happening in the coming weeks, all right?
That sounds good because there really wasn't much happening last week.
All right. Aside from a couple of colleges from Florida playing well last week and some others not, but we won't talk about your alma mater, Iowa. Okay, so on to the next issue.
I did not go there, by the way.
Okay, all right, but that's okay. But you love them, and we'll forgive you for that and praise the Gators. Okay, down to business. So next week in the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Omnibus Guns Bill, it's not the Omnibus Guns Bill, but it's a very large gun bill. It has a lot in it. What's happening in that bill? And tell us a little bit about the committee and where will guns get their start this year?
I think this is a major shift in the Senate that's going to happen this year. It looks at this point, it looks like it on guns. There's a bill up in the Senate Judiciary Committee next week that, as you said, is kind of an omnibus. It has allowing people with concealed weapons licenses to carry guns on college and university campuses, allowing people with the licenses to openly carry handguns in most places in public, allow people to carry guns in airport terminals, not the beyond security part of terminals, but out in the more public spaces of terminals, allow in some government buildings, allow carrying guns, very wide-ranging. It's sponsored by Greg Steube, who is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was just elected to the Senate and named Judiciary Chairman. He has been a big Second Amendment supporter in the House and got elected to the Senate, and he's immediately putting his imprint on this issue in the Senate.
Now historically, this committee and its chairman in the past, this had been where this issue had gone and not proceeded any further.
That's right. Miguel Diaz de la Portilla, who was the Senate Judiciary Chairman over the past 2 years, blocked particularly the big issues have been the campus carry bill and the open carry, allowing people to openly carry handguns. Diaz de la Portilla's committee blocked those bills last year. Very controversial. Second Amendment supporters were very unhappy.
Well, the supporters would argue that it wasn't necessarily the committee, it was the chairman.
Well, that is correct. Diaz de la Portilla basically never heard the bills, if I recall correctly. But I think there's also a different tenor from the top. Senate President Joe Negron met with some of us last month, and he basically said that he's a big Second Amendment supporter and sort of gave his blessing to Steube taking this bill up. That's a little different than last year. The then Senate President Andy Gardner kind of took a hands-off, at least in public, approach to that issue. And Diaz de la Portilla then killed the bills in the committee. So, Gardner certainly was not an advocate for these bills.
Right.
What his real role behind the scenes was, you can leave it to your imagination.
So that was last year. Let's take it to this year. So now we've got Senator Steube, brand new senator, pro-guns. You've got Marianne Hammer, who's leading the NRA and the charge for this. This bill takes it takes these topics into where they've had some success in some other states. Let's break those down a little bit more for our viewers. So,
well, I think the highest profile part of this bill is going to be the allowing people to carry guns on campuses. Pretty much universally, the university system leadership, presidents, law enforcement, a lot of the faculty have opposed this idea. They say we don't want people carrying guns around campuses. Most prominent is probably John Thrasher, the president of Florida State University. I mean, you can't get much more Republican than John Thrasher, but he has been adamantly opposed to this bill over the past few years. So that's probably the most prominent part of this bill. You're right. Parts of this bill have been allowed in other, these proposals have been allowed in other states. I mean, particularly open carry, I think. I think there's a lot of states now where people can openly carry guns. Again, that's something that is controversial in Florida. I'm not sure to the level that the campus carry portion of the bill is. These issues have pretty easily passed the House in the past. And so I think the thinking is that if they can get through the Senate, then they would sail through the House. Representative Scott Plakin, who's down from Seminole County, he's already filed the campus carry bill in the House. So I think we got 2 more months until session, so a lot to play out there. But I think if this starts moving in the Senate, we'll see some traction in the House as well. And I think it's very telling that Stubbe is doing this really during his first committee meeting. I mean, that indicates it's a priority for him.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I think when you look at the issue of guns in Florida, it's certainly been in the politosphere in a prominent role, meaning an oxygen stealer. Some of these issues over the last 10, 15 years in the legislature will take the legislature down for a week. I mean, everything from guns at work to now open carry. So
I think one thing too to remember, if my numbers are correct, and I might be off a little bit, but there's like 1.67 million people in Florida have concealed weapons licenses. So this is an issue that affects people on both sides, but I mean, it affects a lot of people, who may be able to carry guns into places that right now they can't.
Yeah, well, we'll check back in with you on the progress of at least the first step in the Senate and look for any activity in the House, which I'm sure there will be.
Right.
So thanks. Okay, so let's move on to an issue that while the last couple of weeks were somewhat quiet, there was a little bit of bubbling up on the issue of gambling. Where does that stand? We know the compact needs some activity potentially if there is to be another compact. What's happening there?
Well, President Negron made pretty clear to us that he thinks it's important that the state enter a new gambling compact with the Seminole Tribe. He thinks that that's something they should do. There's a revenue aspect to it that the state can get as much revenue more revenue from the tribe. These compacts generally deal with allowing the tribe at its casinos to offer certain games. One of the most prominent has been blackjack. Also, slot machines are an issue. And part of the deal has been in a lot of litigation over the past year. So Negron is saying basically he thinks that they should enter a new compact. But trying to reach a gambling agreement in Florida and get it through the legislature is very, very difficult. Speaker Richard Corcoran has already pretty much said he does not have any appetite for expanded gambling in Florida.
Yeah.
So even if
so while it's warm outside, it might be a little frosty inside the House chambers.
Well, we know that the governor's office met with the representatives of the tribe early in December, trying to negotiate. Essentially, what's probably going to occur if a deal comes together is that the governor's office is going to negotiate it, bring it to the legislature. The legislature could be involved in negotiating that. But Governor Scott has tried to negotiate this as well. So there's a lot of parties at play. Part of the difficulty is, even if they can reach an agreement with the Seminole Tribe, there's all these pari-mutuels in the state that are just sitting out there worried about, they're all looking for market share, they're all looking for the new game that they can offer to make money. I mean, the days of dog racing and horse racing being big money makers for them are kind of in the past.
Yeah, it's gone. It's card tables and slot machines.
It's card tables, slot machines, those sorts of things.
And of course, the tourism industry, they don't want the mega casinos that we saw that attempt a few years ago because that could eclipse the brand. I mean, there's all arguments. While Florida is the 4th largest gambling state in the nation, the argument is how do we make it work with the existing economy?
Well, I mean, this is just an example, but the Seminole Casino over in the Tampa area is humongous. I mean, so anything that affects any part of the compact that affects that would also have a ripple into the pari-mutuels in the Tampa-St. Pete area. I mean, that's just an example, but you can't look at the compact in isolation. One of the things that President Negron said very clearly too is that he thinks there are I think it's 7 or 8 counties around the state that have passed referendums to allow slot machines at their pari-mutuel facilities. Right now, that has not started, but he says he thinks that they should be able to allow slots at these pari-mutuels, so that's another element to the mix. And so it's a very difficult issue, and I think we're going to see, as Speaker Corcoran's already indicating, that the House has never been big fans of expanding gambling.
Yeah, well,
So,
I think on the expansion issue, I mean, you've got a lot of corporate interest at play. You have the No Casinos group out there as chief advocates against it. You have other groups that might be neutral or looking to make sure it doesn't, impact any of the major three legs of Florida's economy. So we know that gambling will be big, and we'll stay tuned on that one. All right, so next, we're going to look at two of Florida's key economic development organizations, and certainly tourism, third leg of our economy, and the organization that is the economic development leader of that is Visit Florida. They just went through some major transitions. The governor sent a letter to the board saying, hey, we think the CEO needs to be replaced. They're going to meet next week. What are we looking for there?
That's right. Visit Florida will meet next week, and on the agenda is going to be, what do we do now, essentially? Will Seckham, who is the outgoing or former CEO, he was asked to resign by the governor after the furor about this $1 million contract that Visit Florida had with Pitbull, the rapper out of Miami. So Visit Florida has to, they have to figure out their leadership, who's going to lead the organization. There were some other top-level employees that are out there, too, have left the organization as well. I think time is of the essence, though. I mean, we're going into the legislative session, and Richard Corcoran, the House Speaker, has put a bullseye on all sorts of economic development issues, including Visit Florida. He is not a fan of funding these programs. His view is that tourism sort of takes care of itself. The economy's good, tourists come to Florida and enjoy the sunshine. Right. The governor, as well as some Senate leaders, think that the state should spend some money on tourism marketing. But Visit Florida is going to need a voice leading them through this next few months during the legislative session to be able to make their case that they deserve some money. And so it's going to be interesting to see next week how they address all this and how they, their leadership, but also just strategy going forward. I mean, you don't want to anger the House Speaker at this point either. So it's a sensitive dance.
And heretofore, Enterprise Florida had usually taken the brunt of the legislative or a senatorial assaults on, are we picking winners and losers, and those sort of arguments. But now that Enterprise Florida has ultimately taken its licks, if you will, over the last couple of years, these other two, we're about to cover one more, organizations have now taken center stage. Visit Florida certainly is center stage now. And then the next up on the stage is Frank DeBello's organization, Space Florida. Right. Now you've got organizations that are global in nature dealing in the space trade. You've got SpaceX, Elon Musk's company, launching private rockets and private satellites into the atmosphere. Then you have Jeff Bezos of Amazon with Blue Horizon, taking up facilities at one of Florida's, really one of the world's best spaceports, if you will, in Cape Canaveral. So these are Florida-funded agencies to market the fact that Florida is a better place to launch your rockets than anywhere else. Well, where are we with that?
We saw I believe it was last month, that one of the Space Florida board members made very clear that they are concerned that, like you said, that the ripple from these other economic development agencies that Corcoran is taking aim at is going to affect Space Florida as well. The amounts of money that go, state money that go to Space Florida are far lower than what goes to Visit Florida or Enterprise Florida, or has in the past at least. So the amounts aren't that large, but it's sort of the philosophy that the speaker brings that, free market philosophy essentially, that the state shouldn't be subsidizing these industries. So I think there's probably a lot of people down in Brevard County who think that's money well spent. But politically, I think they're worried about being in a position similar to Visit Florida, similar to Enterprise Florida, and whether they can maneuver through the legislative session. The last couple of years they've had a House Speaker from Brevard County who could help them. Right. They don't have that anymore. So they also had a Rules Chairman last year. Right. Those sorts of there's a little bit of a, I know it's not just a Brevard issue, but that's where a lot of it comes from.
Yeah, Florida for a long time has made the infrastructure argument because that infrastructure out there is to a large degree owned by the state of Florida. And once the federal government started giving it to the state, and Florida made the argument that not only can we move things vertically or over water, but not only can we move them horizontally, but we can shoot them vertically. Yeah. And when you can move freight vertically, it's kind of a unique place. So we'll see how the legislature treats Space Florida. Yeah. So, all right. Well, Jim, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for coming by and sharing your insights. We'll stay tuned for next week and see where we land.
Thanks.
No pun intended. Okay, maybe a little pun. That's all the time we have for today at Capitol Dateline Online. Please tune into our website at capitoldatelineonline.com or check us out on our Facebook page. Have a great day.